about Korea that stood out for me. A small but powerful country like Korea could be a demonstrate to the rest of the world how we could make it happen to really retool and reorganize society. A large country like mine and complicated, Koreans are quite capable and willing to do the kinds of things they need to do for others around them. This is a miracle because it goes and do a certain amount of it, but then you stop. But you did that. How did you do that? Koreans are smart. Koreans are Americans would never do. We will just fight until we just all fall off a cliff. But when we're falling off the cliff, that's my country. But your country is, this country is not like that. So it gives me hope. Katak. I like using Katak. It's easy to use. I use a lot of texting apps with people around the world because I work all over the world. You know, I have messages that come in from all over on the various platforms. So many Koreans are on Katak that I just use it. Yeah, I have many friends and connections on the app. Last year I came 3 times. This year I will probably come maybe 4. It's nice, but the problem is I don't have the opportunity to spend longer periods of time because I'm teaching. You know, I have a lot of stuff going on in that, but it's good. In 1984, when I was studying for my master's degree, I met a Korean graduate student in my program. I first started learning about Korea, authoritarian or the military government at the time. And I was studying military governments in Latin America because my area of expertise in those years was Latin America. So I became interested naturally in Korea as a case study to compare Korea with the governments in Latin America. And I ate Korean food because, his wife cooked a Korean meal for me. So it was the first time I had kimchi. And I just became fascinated. But my area of focus was really elsewhere. I lived for a long time in Latin America. I studied Europe, I studied Africa, and then later studied the Middle East and traveled a lot to the Middle East. So it was only about 10 years ago when I first started talking more publicly about Korea, but I had always paid attention to Korea's growth for the past almost 40 years since I first discovered. So I've traveled to about 50 countries. I've traveled, because I'm a sociologist, I rarely go to tourist sites. Things, if you read in the guidebooks, they say the 10 most important things to do in Seoul, or Taipei, or in Tokyo, or Mumbai. My most memorable experiences, I think, from my very first trip to Korea was Korean people here in Korea were very much as I have experienced Korean people everywhere. A sense of dignity and self-respect and thoughtfulness and politeness that really has been something that I have observed my whole life, but I really saw it in every aspect. I see it in the Middle East. I mean, Middle Eastern culture, Arab Muslim culture is very self-respecting, very family focused, really a beautiful culture, but just something about Korea that stood out for me. We're in a real crisis, human beings. The crisis is that, we've put all this carbon up into the atmosphere. We can't get it out, and it's creating an unstable climate. We don't know what to do about it. Well, we know we have to decarbonize the world, but that's a very difficult thing to do when you have 8 billion people who are all sort of operating in a particular direction. There's not enough time for us to really comprehend what it is that we're up against. Well, we need some country has to show us how to figure this out. It can't be a really large country like mine and complicated. In my country, we don't agree on anything anyway. We have a very much a way of seeing the world that is just opposite of all the people around us. Whereas Koreans, you have a way of coming to a certain kind of agreement. There's an organic agreement about things. Now, it doesn't look that way when you look at your Congress and your government, right? It looks like people are fighting about everything all the time. I mean, I just watched it, But underneath that, what's important to understand is there is a collective societal community agreement about many, many things compared to most countries in the world. And that's the agreement that I think that kind of way of being in the world is necessary to help figure out how we can possibly make the very difficult decisions that we need to make in order to solve this climate crisis. Relatively small but powerful country like Korea could demonstrate to the rest of the world how we could make it happen to really retool and reorganize society. There's an orientation toward people have to have. We have to make decisions about what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is bad. And we do it all the time. I came to the studio today and I had to decide, hey, do I take a taxi or do I take a subway? And when I get out of the subway, should I go this way or should I go this way? What's the best way? What's the right way? What's the most efficient way? And we're making these kinds of decisions all the time, all day long. And it's related to our morality and our ethics, the good and bad, the right and wrong. There's an orientation when I make those decisions, right? Am I just doing it for myself? Am I only thinking about me, just kind of right here? Or am I also thinking about the people around me? Well, what's good for them? Is it just good for me to take the subway? But what about other people? I'm talking about climate change. So let's decarbonize a little bit. Let's not use so much gas. Let me just take the subway. That'll be good. So I'm thinking about other people and I'm thinking about me. And there's an orientation all the time when we make moral and ethical decisions to either think more about our own individual needs or more about the community needs. And sometimes they're in balance, but usually you're kind of leaning in one direction or you're leaning in another direction. And this is the communitarian orientation of our morality, or the individualist orientation of our morality. And that's how all societies are oriented. My first writing project was on this communitarian orientation to morality. And I was interested in how the ability for poor people in rural Ecuador, where I was working and studying, the ability of poor people to work together to solve their community problems. And it's a time when people were developing more of an individualist way of being in the world. Kind of what we see happening in Korea, a little bit more focused on the individual self. But I was interested in the Catholic Church, could the priests and the nuns help reorient people toward a more communitarian morality and set of moral codes? And so I was studying that, the ability to do that. But we see a similar thing here in Korea. I mean, people are far more individualist oriented today than they were in the past, but nothing in the way that Koreans think so. You know, Koreans today are very selfish and they only think about themselves. And I think you need to go study the rest of the world. Koreans are quite capable and willing to do the kinds of things they need to do for others around them. Look around and say, what are other people doing? What should I do? Comparatively speaking, so it may seem like a big change to people here, but it's actually not when you travel around the world. So why is a communitarian orientation important in today's world? So much of our technology and so much of our way of living in the world just naturally orients us more toward having to be or wanting to be responsible for ourselves. So, we get our phones and we look at our phones and it's just me and the phone. And so that means I'm cut off from other people around me. Now, I might be connected to lots of other people online. With that happening to the degree to which it is, it's important that we have ways of building these connections with other people and social groups around us, right? That we don't just cut ourselves off from them. The communitarian bonds, right? These bonds of like the sense of right and wrong and good and bad, if those shift along with our behavior, which is much more individual focused, then we run into a real problem because society hits a crisis state. Because now the behavior or the thinking about what is the right way to be follows what is actually the individual practice. So the right way to be is, well, I should just be on my phone and I should just be cut off from other people. Then that's really a bit dangerous because once you get to that place, then lots of other things. In English, we have the word cascading. There's like just a series of effects from that, like domino effects. That's not a place we really want to be. And so it's important that these structures of community remain strong to keep people connected. There's a parable of these my wife uses, right? In fact, she builds all of her work around the parable of the blind scholars. You have a series of 7 or 8 scholars, really learned people, but they're all blindfolded and they're all touching an elephant. And maybe one is touching the leg, and one is the tail, and one the ear, and one the back, and one the trunk, and one the mouth. And they all have an idea that they know what it is that they're touching. They can't see it, but they all say according to what they're feeling. Like, oh, this is mouth, or this is a leg, but they're all wrong because they all only see what they're able to see. And what they need is to be connected to the other people around them. They need to talk. They need to have this kind of sense of knowing what it is that other people see. And so this is part of the struggle that we're in as a society, right? We always need other people's opinions and thoughts, even the people we disagree with. We need to hear from them because they might see something that we don't see. So I'm holding on to the tail of the elephant and I'm just certain it's the tail, but maybe I disagree with the person who's saying, no, it's not a tail, it's a tusk or it's a mouth. And then we fight about that. It's like, well, if we don't ever talk to each other, we don't have a sense that neither of us are right. In a way, that's kind of where we're at in life itself. The orientation toward others is essential to the degree to which it allows us to together or collectively work out problems that exist in the world. Human beings are born on this earth, and we're born to explore and to ask questions. You have little kids, and the moment they start talking, they start asking questions. They make observations about what's happening around them, and they ask questions and say, what is this? And what is that? And why is this thing smooth, and why is this thing over here really rough? And they just want to know why, what, explain, how. And I think that's how human beings are in general, right? At some age, as we've developed now these modern education systems, because it's important to fulfill all the jobs that need to be fulfilled. Going back in the later part of the Industrial Revolution, people need to be educated. They need to be literate. They need to be able to read. They need to write. They need to think in a kind of logical ways. And they need to be able to communicate to do most of the jobs that were becoming available and starting in the early part of the 20th century. So we have mass education. But that doesn't fit with life, because no child would ever want to go sit in a school and be strapped down in a chair and just sit like this and read and listen and write. And that's just, there's no child that would, okay, maybe 1% of all children that would choose to do that. Children want to play, they want to explore, eventually they want to learn. Also, they're always going to get to a place where they want to learn. There are many educational systems that allow children to do anything they want to do. And then for weeks and weeks and weeks, the children will just go out and play, but eventually they get bored and they'll come back and they'll sit at a desk and say, okay, I want to read now. Teach me how to read, or teach me how to do the math problems. But that doesn't mean that they would sit 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day or 12 or 14 hours a day, as happens with many children in places like Korea, right? You go to school all day and then you go study at night. But Koreans figured that out. They figured out how to get kids to do that, and they figured out how to get parents to support it. This is a miracle, because I think it goes against basic human nature, which would be to go take breathers and, I don't know, do anything other than that. You do a certain amount of it, but then you stop. But you did that. How did you do that? It's not by force. Nobody's forcing kids. No one's forcing parents. But you did it as a society. And people largely, you did it, you got people to really compete with themselves. They're not just competing with other people. I mean, they compete to try to get the highest score so they get into a good school, right? But largely they're competing with themselves. I think, how did you figure that out? That is really efficient. And then you've got this whole series of cram schools and hagwons. And tomorrow I'm speaking at a hagwon. I have the opportunity to go to one and engage a lot of the kids. I won't say which one, but on a Friday night, my wife and I are going to speak at this cram school, and the kids have signed up to come. And I think, how do you do that on a Friday night? Not just one hagwon, but I'm sure I'll be able to walk down the street and see one after another, after another, after another. That is efficiency. That is pretty amazing. I'm just, as a sociologist, I'm not even to critique it. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It is just amazing that Korea as a society, could make that happen. Here's the thing about climate change, and I say climate collapse because let's be clear, it could happen very quickly. Collapses happen very fast. It's not a slow thing. So it could the right thing can happen and the entire system starts to break down very, very quickly. It's a large ecosystem. The planet is huge. Let's also be clear that it could be much more slowly, right? And it could come into a sense of rebalance, and we're not sure, but the scientists are correct. And they're very smart people, and they're not trying to politically convince us of one thing or another. They're just scholars who are trying to figure out what's going on using science and the scientific method. It seems quite clear that, probably we're in a slow, steady decline, but there are going to be periods when there's rapid change, and it could just spiral. Because you study systems, and that's what happens in systems. In order to really address this in the way that we need to address it, we need some people who are very smart, very willing to follow. Koreans are smart. Koreans are very willing to follow. Remember this idea that you get a whole nation of people minus some percentage that follows the idea that students should study an extraordinary number of hours all year long. We get that. Koreans did that. Well, if they did that, then you can also, I think, reasonably well, very well actually, figure out how to work through some of these climate issues and how to get a society to retool and reorient itself to address some of the very difficult, complex problems that are going to need to be addressed. People around the world are already doing. Corporations are retooling and rethinking and very quickly trying to figure out how we can reduce the carbon output in the world. And so Koreans are already doing it, but we need it to go faster. And we need the population of people to follow. We need them to not resist. Koreans, if there's anyone that's willing to say, like, I see the wisdom of that, I see that we need to do that, okay, I'll jump in, I'll follow. I will do what I need to do. I will contribute to it. Americans would never do that. We will just fight until we just all fall off a cliff. But when we're falling off the cliff, we'll be falling to our demise at the bottom. We'll say, but at least I never changed my mind, or at least I did it my way, or at least I was free as I'm dying. I'm about to die, but at least I'm free. At least I never gave up my principles. That's my country. But this country is not like that. So it gives me hope. Every society around the world, people have a dedication to the education of their children. You can't imagine the kinds of things that people go through in order for their children to receive an education. It may not be a kind of quality education that Koreans have or that you would have here if you had money and you had means in Korea, but the children walking 10 kilometers every day just to go to a school. And the school might be an outdoor school. It may be just a small dirt floor with some kind of slate board that the teacher is writing on, but that parents would sacrifice what they need to sacrifice and pay the kind of money. Maybe it's $5 to enroll their child in school, but that $5 is so much for them, right? People around the world are quite dedicated. Also around the world, wealthy people who send their kids to the best cram schools and hagwons in their country. Every country has tutoring places like this, like Korea has. They just don't have as many. We see this everywhere. I've witnessed some things with schooling in my travels and in my work because, I visited so many schools and I support schools. I personally have schools that I support in other countries like Ethiopia and Brazil and has been in Afghanistan. It's very humbling, profound.